The thunder cracked across the Montana sky like a bullwhip, sending Hope Lawson scrambling from her vegetable garden as the first heavy raindrops pelted the parched earth of her small homestead. It was the summer of 1878, and she had barely managed to make it through her first year alone on this land after her father's passing now. This storm threatened to undo everything she'd worked for. Hope raced toward her modest cabin, the wind tearing at her skirts and loosening her chestnut hair from its practical bun. At 22, she had grown accustomed to hardship, but nothing could have prepared her for the violent force of this prairie tempest. She reached the door just as the wind picked up to a furious howl, the sky darkening to an ominous green-black that made her heart sink with dread. Inside, she rushed to secure the windows, but the cabin groaned in protest as the storm battered its walls. Suddenly, a deafening crack split the air, and Hope screamed as half the roof tore away, exposing her home to the full fury of the elements. Rain poured in, soaking everything: her books, her quilt, the few precious mementos of her family she had left. No, no, no. She cried, desperately trying to save what she could, but the wind only intensified. Her father had built this cabin with his own hands, and now she watched helplessly as nature dismantled it piece by piece. When the first beam crashed down inches from where she stood, Hope knew she had to leave or risk her life. Grabbing only her father's pocket watch and a small leather pouch containing what little money she had, she forced the door open against the wind and stumbled outside. The rain was blinding as she made her way to the stable, praying her horse Penny had weathered the storm. To her relief, the sturdy little building had held, and Penny neighed nervously as Hope entered, soaked to the bone and shivering violently. "It's all right, girl," she soothed, though she felt anything but calm. "We need to find shelter." Her nearest neighbor was the Byers Ranch, about 3 miles west. Hope had met the Byers family only twice since moving to the territory with her father 2 years prior, but she had no choice now. She saddled Penny with trembling hands and led her out into the tempest. The journey was treacherous. Twice, Hope nearly lost her seat as Penny struggled against the wind. Lightning illuminated the landscape in flashes, and Hope prayed fervently that they would make it to safety. They had traveled about 2 miles when Penny suddenly reared, spooked by a fallen tree across their path. Hope, already numb with cold, lost her grip and fell hard to the ground. Pain shot through her ankle as she landed, and she cried out, the sound swallowed by another crack of thunder. "Penny." She called as the horse bolted in panic. Hope tried to stand but collapsed, her ankle unable to bear her weight. Despair washed over her as completely as the rain alone. Injured with no shelter in sight, her chances seemed dire. Then, through the curtain of rain, she saw a lantern bobbing in the darkness, moving toward her. Hope blinked, certain she was hallucinating, but the light grew brighter and soon she made out the silhouette of a rider. "Hello," she called weakly, her voice nearly lost in the storm's roar. The rider approached cautiously, then dismounted in a fluid motion. As he drew nearer with his lantern, Hope saw a tall man with a weather-beaten face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. He knelt beside her, concern evident in his eyes startlingly blue, even in the dim light. "Are you hurt, madam?" His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that identified him as not being from these parts originally. "My ankle," Hope managed through chattering teeth. "My cabin, the roof blew away in the storm." The stranger nodded, assessing her quickly. "I'm Luke Blackwell. Got a ranch about half a mile east of here. Came out to check on my cattle when I saw your horse tearing across my south pasture." He glanced at the sky. "This storm's getting worse. Can you ride?" Hope nodded uncertainly. "I think so." Without another word, Luke gathered her in his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Hope gasped at the sudden proximity to this stranger, but the warmth of his body against her freezing skin was too welcome to resist. He settled her on his horse, then swung up behind her. One strong arm circled her waist, holding her securely against him as he took the reins with his free hand. "I've got you," he said close to her ear. "You'll stay under my roof tonight. The ride to Luke Blackwell's ranch was mercifully short. Through the driving rain, Hope made out the shape of a substantial log house, much larger than her own cabin, with light glowing warmly from the windows. As they approached, a barn door swung open and a figure rushed out with a lantern. "Mr. Blackwell, thank goodness you're back." The voice belonged to an older man who hurried to take the horse's reins as Luke dismounted and then carefully lifted Hope down. "Jenkins, this lady's injured. Her place got hit by the storm," Luke explained briefly. "Fetch some dry clothes from the trunk in the guest room, anything that might fit her. And have Mrs. Cooper prepare something hot." "Right away, sir," Jenkins replied, handing the reins to a young stable boy who had appeared at his side. Luke carried Hope into the house, and she was immediately enveloped in blessed warmth. The main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace crackling with flames. Simple but quality furniture filled the space, a far cry from the sparse furnishings of her own cabin. "Mrs. Cooper." Luke called, and a plump, motherly woman hurried in from what Hope assumed was the kitchen. "Lord have mercy," the woman exclaimed upon seeing Hope's bedraggled state. "Bring her here, Mr. Blackwell. Poor thing's half drowned." Luke set Hope gently on a settle near the fire. "Mrs. Cooper immediately began fussing, removing Hope's sodden shawl and examining her with concern. "I'm Hope Lawson," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "I have a homestead about 3 miles west of here." "John Lawson's daughter?" Luke asked, surprised. "Heard he passed last year." "Didn't know you'd stayed on." Hope nodded, wincing as Mrs. Cooper gently removed her boot to examine her ankle. "Just a sprain, I think," the housekeeper pronounced. "We'll wrap it tight and keep it elevated, but first you need to get out of these wet clothes before you catch your death." Jenkins returned with an armful of clothing. "Best I could find, sir. They belonged to your sister when she visited last summer." "Thank you, Jenkins," Luke said, taking the clothes and handing them to Mrs. Cooper. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Cooper's capable hands. I need to check on the barn, make sure nothing else has blown away." As he strode back out into the storm, Hope couldn't help but notice the broad set of his shoulders and the confident way he moved. There was something reassuring about his presence, something solid and dependable that she hadn't felt since her father died. Mrs. Cooper helped Hope change into dry clothes, a simple blue dress that was slightly too large but clean and warm. The housekeeper then wrapped her ankle tightly and settled her on the settle with her foot propped on a cushion. "Mr. Blackwell runs the largest cattle operation in this part of the territory," Mrs. Cooper explained as she brought Hope a steaming mug of broth. "Came out here from Virginia about 5 years ago, built this place up from nothing, he did." Hope sipped the broth gratefully, feeling warmth seep back into her bones. "I didn't know I had such a prosperous neighbor so close by," Mrs. Cooper chuckled. "Mr. Blackwell keeps to himself mostly. Not one for socializing, though he's fair and generous to those who work for him." She glanced toward the door. "Lost his wife back east before he came here. Doesn't talk about it, but Jenkins says that's what drove him west." Before Hope could respond, the door opened, and Luke returned, bringing with him the smell of rain and leather. He changed into dry clothes as well, and without his hat, Hope could see his features more clearly. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples and a strong jaw covered in stubble. His eyes, when they met hers, were the deep blue of a summer sky. "Storm's easing," he said, approaching the fire to warm his hands. "How's the ankle?" "Better, thank you," Hope replied, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "Mr. Blackwell, I can't thank you enough for your help. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." "Luke," he corrected, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "And anyone would have done the same." He accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. Cooper. "Your horse is safe in my barn, spooked but unharmed." "Oh, thank goodness," Hope sighed with relief. "Penny is all I have left now, I suppose." Luke studied her over his cup. "Your cabin, how bad was the damage?" Hope felt her throat tighten as she remembered the destruction. "Half the roof gone, at least, and with the rain, everything inside is ruined." A long silence followed, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the diminishing sound of rain against the windows. Finally, Luke spoke. "You can stay here until you sort things out. The guest room is yours for as long as you need it." Hope blinked in surprise. "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose. It's settled," Luke interrupted firmly. "No one should be alone after losing their home. Besides, you can't go anywhere on that ankle for a few days at least." Mrs. Cooper nodded approvingly. "I've already had Jenkins prepare the room, Miss Lawson. It's no imposition at all." Hope felt overwhelmed by their kindness. Since her father's death, she'd grown accustomed to fending for herself, to the solitude of her existence. The sudden offer of help and shelter from this stranger was almost too much to process. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just until I can figure out what to do next." Luke nodded once, seemingly satisfied. "Mrs. Cooper will show you to your room when you're ready. You should rest." He set down his empty cup. "I need to check the herd. The storm may have scattered them." With that, he was gone again, leaving Hope with a strange mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. She couldn't deny the relief she felt at having a safe place to stay, but there was something about Luke Blackwell that unsettled her, not in a frightening way, but in a manner that made her acutely aware of herself in a way she hadn't been for a long time. Later, settled in a comfortable bed in the guest room, Hope listened to the last pattering of rain against the window and tried to make sense of her situation. In the span of a few hours, she had lost her home and been rescued by a man she'd never met before, a man who now offered her shelter with no expectations beyond basic human kindness. As sleep finally claimed her, Hope's last thought was of those blue eyes and the inexplicable safety she felt beneath this stranger's roof. Morning came with clear skies and birdsong, a stark contrast to the previous night's violence. Hope awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the throbbing in her ankle reminded her. Sunlight streamed through the window of the guest room, illuminating simple but quality furnishings: a cherrywood dresser, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and the comfortable bed where she lay. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Cooper's entrance. The housekeeper carried a tray with breakfast and a fresh basin of water. "Good morning, Miss Lawson. Thought you might prefer to eat in here, what with your ankle and all." She set the tray on the bedside table. "How are you feeling today?" Hope pushed herself up to sitting, wincing slightly. "Better, thank you, though my ankle's still quite sore." Mrs. Cooper nodded sympathetically. "To be expected. Mr. Blackwell rode out at first light to your property, wanted to assess the damage himself." Hope felt a flutter of anxiety. "He didn't have to do that. That's just his way, Mrs. Cooper said, pouring tea from a small pot. "Never could abide sitting idle when there's something to be done." She handed Hope the cup. "He's a good man, Miss Lawson. Keeps his feelings close, but his heart's in the right place." Hope sipped the tea, uncertain how to respond. Luke Blackwell was already doing far more for her than she could have expected from any neighbor, let alone a stranger. The thought of him seeing the ruin of her little homestead, the place she'd fought so hard to keep after her father's death, filled her with a strange sense of vulnerability. "I should be up and about," Hope said, setting the cup down. "I need to figure out what to do next." Mrs. Cooper frowned. "Not on that ankle, you don't. Doctor's coming by later to have a proper look at it. Mr. Blackwell sent Jenkins to fetch him first thing, a doctor." "But I can't afford Mr. Blackwell's taking care of it," Mrs. Cooper interrupted firmly. "And before you protest, just know he's as stubborn as they come. Now eat your breakfast and I'll help you dress after." Left alone with her meal, Hope found herself torn between gratitude and pride. She had managed on her own for a year, scraping by on what her small garden produced and the occasional egg from her 3 hens. The thought of being indebted to someone, especially a man she barely knew, sat uncomfortably with her. Yet as she ate the hearty breakfast of scrambled eggs and biscuits, she couldn't deny the relief of not having to face her troubles alone, if only for a little while, with Mrs. Cooper's help. Hope dressed in the same borrowed blue dress and managed to make her way downstairs, hobbling with the aid of a walking stick that Jenkins had provided. She was sitting in the main room, her ankle propped up as Mrs. Cooper had insisted, when the front door opened and Luke entered. He paused upon seeing her, removing his hat in a gesture that spoke of good breeding. "Miss Lawson, good to see you up." Hope straightened, suddenly nervous. "Mr. Blackwell, Luke. Mrs. Cooper mentioned you rode to my property this morning." Luke nodded, crossing to stand by the fireplace. Though the day was warm, a small fire burned to take the edge off the morning coolness. "I wanted to see how bad the damage was." Hope braced herself. And he met her gaze directly. "The cabin's still standing, but half the roof is gone, as you said. Rain got to most everything inside. Your chickens survived, found them hiding in the stable, brought them back with me." Hope felt a surge of relief at this small mercy. "Thank you. How bad is the damage? Can it be repaired?" Luke hesitated, and in that moment, Hope knew the answer before he spoke it. It would take significant work. "The frame's compromised. Honestly, it might be easier to rebuild than repair." The weight of his words settled on her shoulders. Rebuild? With what money? With what help? Her father had built that cabin with the assistance of neighbors they'd known back in Missouri who had traveled west with them. Those families had moved on to Oregon the following spring, leaving the Lawsons alone on their homestead. "I see," she said quietly, fighting to maintain her composure. Luke watched her for a moment, then spoke carefully. "There's no rush to decide anything. You're welcome here until you sort things out." Hope shook her head. "I can't impose on you indefinitely. Perhaps when the doctor's seen my ankle, I could make arrangements in town." "The boarding house is no place for a young woman alone," Luke interrupted. His expression softened slightly. "Miss Lawson, Hope, I have plenty of room here and your presence isn't an imposition. Stay, at least until your ankle heals." Before Hope could respond, the sound of hoofbeats outside announced a visitor. Moments later, Jenkins ushered in an older gentleman carrying a leather medical bag. "Dr. Maxwell?" Luke greeted him, stepping forward to shake the man's hand. "Thank you for coming." Of course," the doctor replied, his kind eyes settling on Hope. "And this must be our patient. Jenkins filled me in on the way. Quite an ordeal you've had, my dear." The examination was brief but thorough. Dr. Maxwell confirmed Mrs. Cooper's assessment a sprain, not a break, and recommended at least 2 weeks of rest before putting any significant weight on it. "Keep it wrapped and elevated," he instructed, packing up his supplies. "And no strenuous activity until the swelling's completely gone." He looked at Luke. "She's in good hands here, I can see. Mrs. Cooper's nursing skills rival my own." After the doctor left, a heavy silence fell between Hope and Luke. 2 weeks of enforced rest meant 2 weeks under Luke's roof, at minimum. "Well," Hope said finally, "it seems I'll be accepting your hospitality a bit longer than expected." Something that might have been a smile briefly touched Luke's lips. "So it seems." The next few days settled into an unexpected routine. Hope, confined largely to the house by her injury, found ways to make herself useful despite Mrs. Cooper's protests. She mended clothing, helped prepare meals when allowed, and organized Luke's surprisingly extensive library. Luke himself was often absent during daylight hours, attending to his ranch. But each evening he would return and join Hope for dinner, their conversation gradually easing from awkward politeness to something more comfortable. She learned he had come west after the war, seeking a fresh start after losing his wife to fever. He, in turn, listened as she spoke of her father, a schoolteacher who had dreamed of farming his own land. "He was so proud when we claimed that homestead," Hope told him one evening as they sat by the fire after dinner. "Said it was our piece of the future." Luke studied the amber liquid in his glass. "It's hard to lose a dream along with the person who shared it." His words resonated with a truth Hope had been avoiding. "Yes," she admitted softly. "Sometimes I wonder if I was trying to hold onto the homestead because it was all I had left of him." "And now?" Luke asked, his blue eyes intent on her face. Hope sighed. "Now I don't know." I've spent a year convincing myself I could make it work alone, but the truth is, I was barely surviving before the storm hit. Luke was quiet for a moment. What would you do if you could choose anything? The question startled Hope. For so long, her focus had been simply on enduring, on not losing the land her father had claimed. The idea of choosing a path based on her own desires seemed almost foreign. I used to teach back in Missouri, like my father, she admitted. I miss it sometimes watching a child's face when they finally understand something new. Luke nodded thoughtfully, but said nothing more on the subject that night. The following morning, however, he mentioned that the small town of Riverspend, about 5 miles from his ranch, was seeking a teacher for the coming autumn. "Just thought you might be interested," he said casually over breakfast, not meeting her eyes. Hope felt something warm bloom in her chest at his thoughtfulness. "Perhaps I will inquire about it," she replied, and was rewarded with one of his rare smiles. As the days passed, Hope became increasingly aware of Luke in ways that went beyond gratitude. She noticed the gentle way he spoke to his horses, the respect he showed to Jenkins and Mrs. Cooper, the quiet competence with which he ran his ranch. She found herself watching for his return each evening, enjoying the deep rumble of his laugh on the rare occasions she managed to amuse him. For his part, Luke seemed to soften in her presence. He began to linger after dinner, sometimes reading aloud from one of his books while Hope sewed. Once he even brought out a chess set, teaching her the game with unexpected patience. "You're a natural strategist," he commented after she managed to capture his knight. Hope grinned, enjoying the challenge. "My father always said I thought 3 steps ahead. It used to drive him mad when I'd anticipate his lectures." Luke chuckled, the sound warming her more than the fire. "I can imagine. You have a sharp mind, Hope Lawson." The compliment stayed with her long after they'd finished their game, as did the way he'd looked at her with respect and something else she couldn't quite name. By the end of her first week at the Blackwell ranch, Hope's ankle had improved enough for short walks. Luke fashioned her a better walking stick, the wood smoothed and polished to prevent splinters. Together, they would stroll the grounds in the cool of the evening, Luke matching his long stride to her more tentative pace. During one such walk, they ventured as far as the corral where several horses grazed, including Hope's Penny, who had fully recovered from her fright during the storm. "She looks happy," Hope observed as the mare trotted over to greet her. "Horses are social creatures," Luke replied, reaching out to stroke Penny's nose. "They don't do well alone." Hope glanced at him, wondering if he was speaking of more than just horses. "Neither do people, I suppose, though some of us try to convince ourselves otherwise." Luke's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Hope felt as though he could see straight through to her soul. "Some wounds make us believe we're better off solitary," he said quietly. "Doesn't make it true." Before Hope could respond, Jenkins approached, interrupting the moment with news that required Luke's attention. As he excused himself, Hope remained by the corral, contemplating his words and the strange, tender feeling that had begun to take root in her heart. That night, a summer thunderstorm rolled in, nowhere near as violent as the one that had destroyed her home, but enough to awaken Hope from a sound sleep. Lightning illuminated her room in brief flashes, followed by the rumble of thunder. Usually, she enjoyed storms from the safety of shelter, but tonight, the sound of rain against the roof brought back vivid memories of that terrifying night. Unable to sleep, Hope lit a small lamp and made her way downstairs, thinking a cup of tea might calm her nerves. She was surprised to find Luke already in the kitchen, stoking the banked fire in the stove. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, glancing up at her entrance. Hope shook her head, suddenly conscious of her loose hair and nightgown covered only by a borrowed robe. "The storm," she explained. "Brings it all back." Understanding crossed Luke's face. "I was making some tea. Join me." They sat at the kitchen table, the small room cozy in the lamplight as rain pattered against the windows. Hope cradled her cup, drawing comfort from its warmth and from Luke's quiet presence across from her. "I used to fear storms as a child," Luke said unexpectedly. My father said it was foolish, but my mother would sit with me, telling stories until I fell asleep despite the thunder. Hope smiled, trying to imagine Luke as a frightened child. What kind of stories? Adventures mostly. Nights and distant lands. A fond smile touched his lips. She had quite an imagination, my mother. She sounds wonderful, Hope said softly. Luke nodded. Taught me that strength isn't about never being afraid, it's about facing your fears anyway. A particularly loud crack of thunder made Hope jump slightly, some tea sloshing over the edge of her cup. Luke reached across the table, his hand covering hers in a gesture of reassurance. "You're safe here," he said, his voice low and certain. Hope looked up, meeting his gaze in the soft lamplight. "I know," she whispered, and realized it was true. Despite knowing him for such a short time, she felt safer with Luke than she had since her father's death. His hand remained on hers, warm and strong, neither of them willing to break the connection. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since the night he'd found her in the storm. Finally, Luke gently withdrew his hand and stood. "We should try to get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch." Hope nodded, though she was reluctant for the moment to end. "Thank you for the tea and the company." As they ascended the stairs to their respective rooms, Hope felt Luke's presence behind her like a physical touch. At her door, she turned to bid him good night and found him closer than she'd expected, his expression unreadable in the dim hallway. "Good night, Hope," he said softly, his voice husky in a way that sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. "Good night, Luke," she replied, her own voice barely audible over the rain. For a breathless moment, she thought he might say more or perhaps lean down to kiss her, but then he stepped back, inclining his head slightly before continuing down the hall to his own room. Hope closed her door and leaned against it, her heart racing. What was happening between them? Was it merely gratitude and proximity, or something deeper? And if it was something deeper, what then? She was essentially homeless, with few prospects beyond the possibility of a teaching position. Luke was established, successful. What could she possibly offer him? Yet as she returned to bed, the sound of the rain now a soothing rhythm rather than a fearful reminder, Hope allowed herself to imagine a future where their paths remained intertwined. It was a dangerous dream, perhaps, but in the darkness of night, it offered a comfort she had not expected to find again. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Hope descended to breakfast with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness, uncertain how Luke would act after their midnight encounter. To her disappointment, Jenkins informed her that Luke had ridden out at first light to check on cattle in the north pasture. "Said not to expect him until dinner, Miss Lawson," the foreman added. "Storm spooked some of the herd into the high country." Hope nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course, thank you, Jenkins." The day stretched before her, suddenly longer without the prospect of seeing Luke. To occupy herself, Hope decided to bake, something she hadn't done since losing her home. Mrs. Cooper was delighted to surrender her kitchen for the afternoon, and soon the house was filled with the comforting aroma of apple pie made with fruit from Luke's own small orchard. As Hope worked, she found herself wondering about the woman Luke had lost. What had she been like? Did she enjoy baking, or was she more interested in books or music? These thoughts led to more personal ones. Did Luke still love his late wife? Could there ever be room in his heart for someone new? Hope chided herself for such fanciful musings. Luke had offered her shelter and kindness, nothing more. Any deeper feelings she might be developing were her own concern, not his. Yet when he returned that evening, dusty and tired from a long day in the saddle, the smile that lit his face upon seeing her waiting on the porch made Hope's heart skip. It was a smile that reached his eyes, transforming his usually serious expression into something that stole her breath. "Something smells wonderful," he said by way of greeting as he handed his horse over to the waiting stable boy. "Apple pie," Hope replied, inexplicably shy. "I thought it might be nice after a long day." Luke climbed the porch steps, stopping just short of where she stood. Very nice indeed." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary before he continued inside to clean up for dinner. The meal that evening was more animated than usual, with Luke recounting his day's adventures tracking down stray cattle. Hope found herself laughing at his description of a particularly stubborn calf that had led them on a merry chase through a thicket. "Never seen Jenkins so out of breath," Luke chuckled. "Said he's getting too old for such foolishness." "Jenkins is barely 50, Mrs." Cooper protested, bringing in the pie Hope had baked. "Don't tell him that," Luke winked at Hope. "He likes to claim ancient wisdom when it suits him." The easy camaraderie of the moment warmed Hope as much as the delicious meal. For the first time since her father's death, she felt part of something, a household, a community of sorts. It was a dangerous feeling to grow accustomed to, she knew, but impossible to resist. After Mrs. Cooper had cleared the dishes, Luke surprised Hope by suggesting they step outside to enjoy the evening air. Her ankle, much improved now, allowed her to walk with only minimal discomfort, though she still carried the walking stick as a precaution. The night was warm, stars blanketing the vast Montana sky in a display that never failed to humble Hope. They walked in comfortable silence to a bench situated beneath a large oak tree, far enough from the house to offer privacy, but not so distant as to seem improper. "Jenkins mentioned you visited town today," Hope said as they sat. Luke nodded. "Had business at the bank, also spoke to Mr. Peterson about the teaching position." Hope looked at him in surprise. "You did?" "Hope," Luke began, his voice serious, "I know you're still deciding what to do next. But Peterson said they're desperate for a qualified teacher by September. The last one left to get married, and they've had no suitable applicants." Hope felt a flutter of excitement. "Did you tell him about me?" "Just that I knew someone with teaching experience who might be interested." Luke turned slightly to face her. "It pays $30 a month, plus room and board at the boarding house in town." Hope did a quick calculation in her head. It wasn't a fortune, but it would be steady income, more than she had managed to earn from her small homestead in the past year. And teaching again. The thought filled her with unexpected longing. "It sounds promising," she admitted, "though I'd need to meet with Mr. Peterson properly. He's expecting you whenever you're ready." Luke hesitated, then added, "If that's what you want." There was something in his tone that made Hope look at him closely. "Is that what you think I should do?" Luke's gaze was steady on hers. "I think you should do what makes you happy, Hope. You've spent a year trying to hold onto your father's dream. Maybe it's time to pursue your own." The simple wisdom of his words struck Hope deeply. He was right. She had been clinging to the homestead out of loyalty to her father, not because farming brought her joy. Teaching, though, that had always been her passion. "Thank you," she said softly, "for thinking of me for all of this." Luke's expression softened in the moonlight. "You don't need to thank me. He broke off, seeming to struggle with his words. "I've enjoyed having you here more than I expected to." Hope's breath caught at the admission. "I've enjoyed being here too," she whispered. A moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Luke's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, asking a silent question. Hope felt herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something stronger than conscious thought. When his lips finally met hers, it was gentle, tentative, even as if he feared she might pull away. But Hope responded with a certainty that surprised her, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. The kiss deepened slowly, Luke's hand moving to cradle her face with a tenderness that brought unexpected tears to Hope's eyes. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for days," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. Hope smiled, her heart too full for words at first. "I've wanted you to," she finally admitted. Luke drew back slightly, studying her face in the moonlight. "Hope, I need to be honest with you. I never expected to feel this way again after Elizabeth died. I came west to escape memories, not to make new ones." His thumb brushed gently over her cheekbone. But then you arrived and something changed. Hope understood the weight of his confession. I wasn't looking for this either, she said softly. After losing father, I thought my heart would be too occupied with grief to feel anything else. And now, Luke asked, vulnerability evident in his question, now I find myself looking forward instead of back, Hope answered truthfully. For the first time in a long while. Luke's smile was slow but transformative, years seeming to fall away from his face. I'd like to court you properly, Hope Lawson, if you'll allow it, the formal request made Hope smile. I believe I would like that very much, Luke Blackwell. He kissed her again, briefly but with a promise of more to come. As they walked back to the house, his hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that felt both new and somehow familiar, as if they had been moving toward this moment since the night of the storm. The following weeks unfolded in a way Hope could never have predicted when she lost her home. Her ankle healed completely, allowing her freedom to explore Luke's ranch and accompany him on rides across his vast property. Each day brought them closer, conversations extending long into the evening as they discovered shared interests and complementary perspectives. Hope met with Mr. Peterson in town and was offered the teaching position on the spot. The school term would begin in September, giving her just over a month to prepare. Luke surprised her by converting a small, unused room in his house into a study where she could plan her lessons and organize materials. I thought you might prefer this to working in your bedroom, he explained as he showed her the space, outfitted with a desk, bookshelves, and a comfortable chair by the window. Hope was touched by his thoughtfulness. It's perfect, she said, running her hand along the smooth desktop. But won't you need the room back when I move to town for the school term? Luke's expression grew serious. About that, he began, then hesitated. Hope, I've been thinking. The boarding house in town is respectable enough, but it's small and you'd have little privacy. And it's 5 miles from here. Hope waited, sensing there was more to his thoughts. What if you continued to live here? He suggested. I could drive you to town each morning for school and bring you home afterward. The offer was practical, but Hope recognized the deeper implications. Luke, she said carefully, people would talk. An unmarried woman living in a bachelor's home, even with Mrs. Cooper as chaperone. Let them talk, Luke said, then shook his head. No, you're right, it wouldn't be proper. He paced the small room, seeming uncharacteristically agitated. I'm not explaining myself well. Hope watched him, her heart beginning to race as she sensed the conversation turning toward something momentous. Luke stopped and faced her, his expression resolute. Hope, I know we've known each other only a short time. But in these weeks I've come to care for you deeply. He took her hands in his. I never thought I'd feel this way again, never wanted to, but you changed that. Hope felt tears pricking at her eyes. Luke, please let me finish, he said gently. I'm not asking you to answer today. But I want you to know that if you decided you might want a future here with me, I would be honored to call you my wife. The proposal, though tentatively framed, stole Hope's breath. Are you certain? She whispered. This isn't just because of my situation. Luke's gaze was unwavering. I'm offering because the thought of you leaving, of not seeing you each day, makes me realize what I truly want. And that's you, Hope Lawson, storm damage and all. A laugh escaped through Hope's tears at his choice of words. Storm damage, Luke smiled, reaching up to brush a tear from her cheek. We all have some. Mine kept me isolated for years. Then you blew in with the rain, and suddenly my house felt like a home again. Hope studied his face, seeing nothing but sincerity in his blue eyes. In the short time they'd known each other, Luke had shown her his character through actions more than words, his kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength. She had fallen in love with him gradually and then all at once, like a dawn that begins with the faintest lightening of the sky and suddenly bursts into full daylight. Yes, she said simply. Luke blinked. Yes, Hope nodded, her smile growing. Yes, I'll marry you, Luke Blackwell. Not because I need a roof over my head, but because I love you. The words, spoken aloud for the first time, seemed to unlock something in Luke. He gathered her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in an uncharacteristic display of jubilation, before setting her down to kiss her properly, a kiss full of promise and passion that left them both breathless. When they finally parted, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said quietly. "Have for weeks now." The admission, so simply stated yet so profound, filled Hope's heart to overflowing. From the ruins of her old life, something beautiful and unexpected had emerged, not just shelter from a storm, but a love that promised to weather whatever life might bring them. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the town's church with Mrs. Cooper, Jenkins, and a few of Luke's ranch hands in attendance. Hope wore a new dress of pale blue silk that Luke had ordered from Helena, insisting it was his right as a groom to spoil his bride. The town was abuzz with the news, the reserved rancher Luke Blackwell marrying the new schoolteacher before she'd even taught her first class. There were whispers, of course, speculation about the hasty wedding, but Hope and Luke paid them no mind. They knew the truth of their feelings, and that was all that mattered. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch, now their home together. Mrs. Cooper had prepared a special dinner, and Jenkins had decorated the porch with lanterns and wildflowers. As evening fell, the ranch hands discreetly made themselves scarce, leaving the newlyweds to their privacy. Standing on the porch as the stars emerged, Luke's arm around her waist, Hope marveled at the turns her life had taken. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That I never imagined losing my roof would lead me here," Hope replied honestly. "That's sometimes what seems like disaster can be the beginning of something wonderful." Luke turned her in his arms, his expression serious despite the happiness of the day. "I'll never let you be without a roof again, Hope. I promise you that." Hope reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that spoke of years in the sun and wind. "I know, but even if another storm came tomorrow and took this house too, I'd be all right." She smiled up at him. "Because home isn't just a place, is it? It's where we're together." Luke's answering smile was tender as he lowered his lips to hers. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwell," he whispered against her mouth, "for good this time." As summer gave way to autumn, Hope began her teaching position at the Riverspend school. Each morning, Luke would drive her to town in the wagon, and each afternoon he would be waiting when the school day ended. The children quickly grew to love their new teacher, whose kindness was matched by her firm expectations for their learning. Hope found that marriage to Luke brought a contentment she had never known before. They settled into rhythms that suited them both: early mornings with coffee on the porch watching the sunrise, evenings spent reading aloud or playing chess by the fire. Luke taught Hope about ranching, and she introduced him to poetry he'd never appreciated before. Their physical relationship deepened as well, each discovering in the other a passion neither had expected. In the privacy of their bedroom, Hope found a freedom and joy that made her blush to remember in daylight hours. Luke, for his part, seemed amazed by the depth of their connection, admitting one night that he had never experienced such completeness, even in his first marriage. "I loved Elizabeth," he told Hope as they lay tangled together in the darkness. "But we were younger and I was different then. What I feel for you," he struggled for words. "It's as if all the years between prepared me to love you more fully." Hope understood. Her own heart had been shaped by loss and solitude, making her more appreciative of the gift they had found in each other. As winter approached, bringing with it shorter days and the first dusting of snow on the distant mountains, Hope began to suspect a new change in their lives. Her monthly courses, regular as clockwork since she was 16, failed to arrive. A visit to Dr. Maxwell confirmed her suspicions she was with child, due in late spring. When she told Luke that evening, his response was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit with a joy she had never seen before, and he gathered her in his arms with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. "A child," he whispered against her hair. "Our child." The months that followed were filled with preparations. Luke insisted on converting a room adjacent to theirs into a nursery, commissioning a craftsman in Helena to build a cradle of the finest cherry wood. Hope continued teaching until her condition became too obvious, at which point the school board granted her leave with the position held for her return the following term if she wished. As her body changed, Luke's attentiveness only increased. He rubbed her aching feet in the evenings, sent to Denver for books on motherhood, and once rode 15 miles to satisfy her craving for peach preserves when their own supply ran out. "You're spoiling me," Hope protested one evening as he added another pillow behind her back. "I'm caring for my wife and child," Luke corrected, his hand coming to rest on her rounded belly. Besides, after what happened with Elizabeth, he didn't need to finish. Hope knew that Luke's first wife had died in childbirth along with their infant son. His fear for Hope's safety was understandable, though she did her best to reassure him. "Dr. Maxwell says I'm healthy as a horse," she reminded him, "and this little one is strong. Feel how he kicks." Luke smiled as the baby responded to his touch with a forceful movement. He corrected. "I think it's a girl, a daughter with her mother's spirit," Hope laughed. "We'll see who's right in a few months." As winter deepened into the new year of 1879, the ranch settled into the quiet rhythms of the season. Cattle huddled in sheltered pastures, fed with hay stored in the barn. The hands spent their days checking fences and clearing paths when snow fell. Inside, Hope prepared for the baby's arrival, sewing tiny garments and reading everything she could about infant care. One evening in February, as a particularly fierce blizzard howled outside, Hope sat by the fire working on a small quilt. Luke entered from his study, where he had been reviewing the ranch accounts, and settled beside her on the sofa. "Remember the night we met?" he asked, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Hope smiled, her needle pausing. "How could I forget? I was certain I would die out there in that storm." "I almost didn't ride out that night," Luke admitted. "Jenkins thought I was mad to check the herd in such weather." Hope set aside her sewing to look at him. "Why did you go then?" Luke was quiet for a moment. "Something urged me, a feeling I couldn't explain." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Now I think it was Providence if I hadn't found you." "But you did," Hope said softly. "And here we are," Luke nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Here we are, about to become parents, building a life neither of us expected." "Regrets?" Hope asked, a flicker of old insecurity surfacing despite their months of happiness. Luke's response was immediate and definitive. "Not one. Except perhaps that we didn't meet sooner." He placed his hand on her belly, where their child grew stronger each day. "Though then we might not have this precise child, so perhaps the timing was perfect after all." Hope leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. Outside, the wind howled and snow battered the windows. But within the walls of their home, all was warmth and security, everything she had feared lost on that stormy night months ago, now found in greater measure than she could have imagined. Their daughter, Elizabeth Hope Blackwell, was born on a clear April morning in 1879. The labor was long but uncomplicated, with Dr. Maxwell declaring both mother and child in excellent health. Luke, who had paced the hallway throughout the night, entered the bedroom with fear and hope warring on his face. The sight of Hope, tired but radiant, holding their pink wrapped bundle, brought him to his knees beside the bed. "She's perfect," Hope whispered as he gazed in wonder at the tiny face peeping from the blankets. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" Luke hesitated, his hands capable of breaking horses and managing thousands of acres suddenly seeming too large and rough for such a delicate task. But when Hope placed the infant in his arms, something shifted in his expression, a tenderness breaking through that brought tears to Hope's eyes. "Hello, little one," he murmured, a finger gently stroking the baby's soft cheek. "I've been waiting for you." They named her after both Luke's first wife and Hope, a bridge between past and present that acknowledged the journey that had brought them to this moment. Little Ellie, as they came to call her, had Luke's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair that promised to be as rich as her mother's chestnut locks. The months that followed were a blur of joy and exhaustion as they adjusted to parenthood. Luke proved to be an attentive father, often taking the baby in the early morning hours so Hope could rest. The sight of the tall rancher walking the floors with a tiny infant cradled against his broad chest became a common one in the Blackwell household. By autumn, Hope was ready to return to teaching part-time, with Mrs. Cooper happily tending to Ellie during the morning hours. The arrangement worked well, allowing Hope to maintain her connection to the school while still spending ample time with her daughter. Life settled into new patterns, the ranch thriving under Luke's management while their family grew in love and happiness. The following spring, they visited Hope's old homestead together for the first time since the storm. The cabin still stood, though in disrepair, a silent testament to the life Hope had fought so hard to maintain alone. "We could rebuild it," Luke suggested as they stood hand in hand before the structure. "Not to live in, but as a reminder, for Ellie someday." Hope considered the idea but eventually shook her head. "No," she said softly. "The land is what matters, my father's piece of the future, as he called it. We can keep it, perhaps plant an orchard here, but our home is with you where it has been since that night." Luke nodded, understanding in his eyes. "An orchard it is, then. Apple trees, I think. Our daughter should know the taste of fruit from her grandfather's land." The decision felt right, honoring the past while embracing their future. As they prepared to leave, Hope caught sight of wildflowers growing near where her garden had once been purple coneflowers, their faces turned toward the sun. She knelt to gather a small bouquet, thinking of how life persisted, finding new ways to bloom even after devastation. On the ride back to their ranch, Ellie secure in her mother's arms, Hope reflected on the strange path that had led her here. A single night of destruction had ultimately given her everything she now held dear: a loving husband, a beautiful daughter, a home filled with warmth and purpose. "What are you smiling about?" Luke asked, glancing at her as he guided the wagon along the familiar road. Hope met his gaze, her heart full. "Just thinking how fortunate we are that my roof blew away in that storm." Luke's laugh was warm in the spring air. "Most unusual blessing I've ever heard of." "But a blessing nonetheless," Hope replied, leaning slightly against his shoulder, as their ranch came into view, solid and welcoming against the backdrop of Montana sky. Hope felt a profound gratitude wash over her. Life would bring more storms, it always did, but she no longer feared them. She had found her shelter, not just in the walls of their home but in the love they had built together, stronger than any roof, capable of withstanding whatever weather might come. That night, as they settled Ellie to sleep in her cradle, Luke drew Hope close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Happy?" he asked simply. Hope nodded, words momentarily beyond her as she took in the scene: their daughter sleeping peacefully, the home they'd made together, the man who had rescued her in more ways than one. "More than I ever thought possible," she finally managed. "And you?" Luke's answer was in his kiss, tender and passionate all at once, a promise renewed each day of their life together. When he finally drew back, his eyes held hers with the same intensity she'd first noticed that stormy night, now softened by love. "I used to think I came west to escape," he said quietly. "Now I know I was just making my way to you." Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, pattering against the roof that sheltered them, not the end of something as it had once been for Hope, but part of the continuing story they wrote together, drop by drop, day by day, beneath the vast Montana sky. Years passed, the seasons turning in their eternal cycle. The Blackwell ranch prospered, expanding as Luke acquired neighboring properties. Hope continued teaching until their second child arrived, a son they named Thomas after her father. Eventually, a third child joined their family, another daughter they called Sarah, completing their happiness. The town of Riversbend grew as well, the railroad bringing new settlers and opportunities. Hope eventually became the head of the school, overseeing 3 teachers and more than 60 pupils. Luke served on the town council, his fair-mindedness and integrity earning him the respect of even those who had once whispered about his hasty marriage. Their children flourished in the freedom of ranch life, learning to ride almost before they could walk, developing the same love for the land that their parents shared. Ellie showed an aptitude for learning that reminded everyone of her mother, while Thomas inherited his father's way with horses and quiet determination. Little Sarah, the baby of the family, combined both parents' traits with a spirited independence all her own. On the 10th anniversary of the storm that had brought them together, Luke surprised Hope with a special gift, a locket containing miniature portraits of their 3 children, engraved on the back with words that brought tears to her eyes. "From the storm came our greatest blessing." That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch swing Luke had built years earlier, wrapped in a quilt against the cool autumn air. The ranch stretched before them, peaceful in the moonlight, the distant mountains standing sentinel against the star-filled sky. "Did you ever imagine this?" Hope asked, her head resting on Luke's shoulder. "That night when you found me half drowned in the rain," Luke's arm tightened around her. "Not in my wildest dreams. I was just trying to get you somewhere dry." He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "Though I do remember thinking you were the most beautiful half-drowned woman I'd ever seen." Hope laughed, swatting his arm lightly. "Such flattery, Mr. Blackwell. Honest truth, Mrs. Blackwell," he countered, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. "You took my breath away then. Still do." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind in the trees Luke had planted when they first married, the occasional hoot of an owl hunting in the darkness. "I still miss my father," Hope said softly after a while. "Wish he could have seen all this, the children, the orchard we planted on his land, what the school has become." Luke nodded, understanding in his silence. They had both known loss, had both rebuilt their lives from grief's ashes. It was one of the many bonds between them, the knowledge that joy and sorrow were often woven from the same thread. "I think he knows," Luke said finally. "Wherever he is, I think he sees how happy you are, how much you've accomplished." Hope smiled, the familiar warmth of Luke's belief comforting her as it always did. In the decade of their marriage, his faith in her had never wavered, supporting her through childbirth and loss, through the challenges of balancing motherhood and her career, through all the ordinary trials of life on the frontier. "What about you?" she asked, tilting her face up to his. "Are you happy with how things turned out, Cowboy?" The endearment, a playful reference to their first meeting, brought a smile to Luke's face. His eyes, still as blue as the summer sky despite the silver now liberally streaking his dark hair, held hers with the same intensity that had always made her heart quicken. "Happier than I deserve to be," he answered honestly. "You gave me a second chance at life, Hope, at family, at love. There aren't words enough to thank you for that." Hope reached up to touch his face, the contours as familiar to her now as her own reflection. "No thanks needed. We saved each other, I think." As if to punctuate her words, a shooting star blazed across the sky, a brief, brilliant arc of light against the darkness. They watched it together, this couple who had found each other in a storm and built a life as vast and beautiful as the Montana night surrounding them. "Make a wish," Luke whispered, a tradition they had shared with their children on countless star-gazing evenings. Hope closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with a smile. "Already have everything I could wish for," she said simply. Luke's answering kiss was tender with the love of a decade shared, yet still carrying the spark that had ignited between them that first night beneath his roof. When they finally parted, the look they exchanged held all the words that still remained unspoken between them: gratitude for the past, joy in the present, hope for the future stretching before them like the endless prairie. Hand in hand, they rose to go inside, to the home they had made together, not just the physical structure of wood and stone, but the deeper dwelling place they had built in each other's hearts, sheltering them through every season, stronger than any storm that life might bring.